It is no secret to anybody that follows the MLB relatively closely that Braves GM Alex Anthopolous is a genius. Somehow, year in and year out, he finds young, talented players within his system that are able to produce and signs them to very team-friendly contracts that I would dream of for my Seattle Mariners. It all started back in 2019 where the Braves signed Ronald Acuna Jr. and Ozzie Albies to contracts that made me scratch my head, if I'm being honest with you. Acuna Jr. coming off his Rookie of the Year season signed an 8-year, $100 million contract. That's just a $12.5 million annual average for a player that in 2019 was an MVP 5 who hit 41 home runs and stole 37 bags and drove in 101 RBIs and led the league in runs scored at 127. With a season like that under his belt in the first year of his contract, you could already tell that this 8-year, $100 million deal was really cheap for a player of Acuna Jr.'s standards. Now, obviously, Acuna Jr. hasn't really been the same player since he tore his ACL, and there's still yet to be seen of how he's going to recover off of that. But at this rate, this $12.5 million annual average is a steal for a player of his caliber. Ozzie Albies, the other player mentioned, signed a 7-year, $35 million contract coming off of an all-star year. And in that 2019 year where he signed this contract, he won the Silver Slugger at the second base position. Getting offensive production out of a second baseman in the MLB today is almost harder than finding a four-leaf clover, it seems. At least for teams like the Mariners. $5 million annual average for a player like Ozzie Albies, again, is a steal. Now, I look to see what Jerry Dipoto has done with certain players within our system to try and adopt the Alex Anthopolous tactic, to try and compare what this contract is to someone in our system. And the closest thing I really could find is what we signed JP Crawford for. It was 5 years, $51 million, so it is double the amount of money, but it is at a more premier position at shortstop as opposed to second base. We took JP Crawford and signed him out of his arbitration years, essentially, and that's what the Braves did with Acuna Jr. and Ozzie Albies. Hey, 80% of you guys aren't subscribed that are watching. Consider subscribing if you guys like the content. This last season, Austin Riley saw a massive extension for a 10-year, $212 million contract to play third base for the Braves for the entirety of his career. I would compare this contract to what Julio got. Obviously, at its base level, it's a 12-year, $209 million contract, but it's really not that simple because the maximum amount it can grow to is 470, and I'm not going to want to go into the details on that, but Austin Riley was a really good player for the Braves in 2021, and then they extended him this contract in 2022. He's going into his prime, and Julio Rodriguez, to me, is a player that the Mariners have had their eyes on to lock up very early on. They see the potential, just like the Braves saw in Austin Riley, and they locked them up to 10+ year contracts, both within the same season. But now let's take a deeper look at Austin Riley's contract. Obviously, like I said, it's a 10-year, $212 million contract he signed in August of this past season, and it's a $21.2 million annual average. $21.2 million seems like a steal at this point with how the free agency has gone this past season. I'm scared to see what Rafael Devers might get in free agency next year, but getting a player like Austin Riley at $21 million a year is a job well done by Alex Anthopolous, especially for the entirety of his career. Now, with these examples being in the past, I want to take a look at some current examples that I want to compare the Braves have done for what I think the Mariners should do. Now, the deal that got the ball rolling for me thinking about this and why I want Jerry Dipoto to take this tactic from Alex Anthopolous was the Sean Murphy signing. I tweeted about it on Twitter. Go follow us over there at Mojo Mariner. Sean Murphy was traded from the Oakland Athletics to the Atlanta Braves this offseason, and he's already signed a 6-year, $73 million contract extension with them. They have bought out his arbitration years. He's going to be a free agent at the age of 35. They've even got a club option at the end of this in 2029, and it's a $12.1 million annual average. Sean Murphy had a 120 OPS plus in 2022. He's got a career 114 OPS plus. Obviously, he's a plus defender there at the catching position. He had 18 home runs and 66 RBIs in Oakland. I can't imagine how much his level of production is going to increase by being in a lineup surrounded by players that can, 1, get on base, and 2, protect behind him and drive him in that lineup. So what does this mean for the Seattle Mariners? Well, it means extend Cal Raleigh. It means take Cal Raleigh and make him a Mariner for 6 to 8 more years. Obviously, Cal Raleigh is still in arbitration. He has not had the amount of service time needed to become a free agent. However, getting Cal Raleigh on a team-friendly deal now as opposed to seeing what the arbitration is going to offer him, it just makes the money a lot more clear about where we're at in terms of our talent. I could see a similar contract to this, maybe a little bit less, because 1, Cal Raleigh is not as good of a defender as Sean Murphy. I'll be the first to admit it. Sean Murphy's a better defender. I'll also be the first to admit that Sean Murphy has better bat to ball skills. He gets on base a bit bit more. He has a higher average. However, Cal Raleigh does have the power part behind him. I could see if it's going to be 6 years, maybe try and sign him next offseason for a 6-year, like $60 million contract, maybe like a $66 million contract where it's $11 million per year. Or if you want to hit that same $12 million per year, give him the same contract, 6 years, $73 million. Even if you don't get the club option, it'd still be nice to have some clarity around what his contract might look like instead of playing that guessing game come free agency and seeing him potentially walk. Another extension the Braves made this season was signing Spencer Strider to a 6-year, $75 million contract before the season had even ended. Spencer Strider was a rookie, and he came second in Rookie of the Year voting behind his teammate Michael Harris II. In this season, he had 134 innings pitched with a 1.52 ERA plus and a 13.6 Ks per 9. He's only 23. They signed him for 6 years. Like I said, $75 million. They've got a club option in 2029. He'll be a free agent at age 31. They bought out his arbitration years to potentially have a Cy Young Award winner or a top 5 Cy Young Award winner finish for $12 million and some change. That is a steal of a deal for a team-friendly contract. So why not sign Logan Gilbert and George Kirby to something very similar? We just extended Luis Castillo for 5 years, $115 million. Logan Gilbert and George Kirby have not been as good as Spencer Strider was in his 134 innings pitched. It's just that simple. Spencer Strider, he signed for $12.5 million. If we can get George Kirby or Logan Gilbert on something lower than that per annual average, do it now before they start finishing in the top 10 in Cy Young votings and their value starts rising. Get them on those team-friendly contracts to help with the budgeting costs later on, since we're so fixated on that 2026 payroll as it is. Logan Gilbert and George Kirby, I could see maybe Logan Gilbert in the middle of the season, George Kirby in a year or two from now. Signing anywhere between 5 and 7, like in that range, is good. And similar money, 75 to maybe 80 or 90 million dollars, depends on how they're pitching at that point in time, but it's going to lock them up. And if you have faith in them and have a development system for them to continue to get better, you're putting money where your mouth is at that point. But they're players that you can bet on. You're not going to sign the ones that you're unsure of, but players like Logan Gilbert and George Kirby seem like locks, like Spencer Strider was, so they should be signed to those team-friendly contracts if available to us, because obviously certain players don't want to do it for whatever reason. Now, obviously, the Braves have been perennial contenders for the last couple of years, and they were even a really good team in the early 2010s, so they've got that winning pedigree already built up. They've got that prestige, which allows the players to want to stay within that franchise for maybe more team-friendly deals. The Mariners do not have that luxury, as they've just made the playoffs for the first time in 21 years. However, I do think these players that helped you get there would be the most likely to want to sign these more team-friendly contracts. So get Cal, Logan, and George Kirby on these contracts to play alongside Julio for the rest of their careers, or the rest of their primes, to lead the push for the Mariners to make the playoffs for the next decade. Now, I did mention the Julio contract being pretty confusing. We do have a breakdown on that contract on the screen right now. I thank you guys for watching this one, and go Mariners.